Let's see. Tyler's always got some sort of infosec joke. I'll put you on the spot today. What do you got, Tyler? We're ready to roll. Welcome to CactusCon 10. Everybody excited to be here? All right, yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to be here. I'd clap too, but the clicker and the microphone would go crazy. There'd be thunder. It'd be awful. Well, today we're here to talk about disinformation, or as I like to call it, malware of the mind. Yeah, and there's kind of a funny lead-in story to this. About in late 2015, I was on a long flight back from Tel Aviv drinking wine. And of course, like a lot of folks in the room, was traveling around trying to help people with strategies to deal with malware, and had just taught a class there in Tel Aviv. So like I'd been on a long stretch of trips, and it was everything on my mind was malware prevention, malware prevention, malware prevention. And who remembers that there might have been a little bit of disinformation, and it might have been a hot topic back in 2015? Yeah, a little bit. Although I must say, back then, it wasn't quite as much a household word as it is now. But on that flight back from Tel Aviv, several glasses of wine in, because what else do you do on a flight back from Tel Aviv? Watch movies, drink wine, catch up on all the emails from while you were traveling. It occurred to me, like, are the phenomenon that different, right? The ways that we misinform an information system during the compromise cycle versus the way that we actually, what we study all the time of how compromise works on information systems. Like, it just began to occur to me that there were some parallels. So back then, I did a horrible podcast. Don't watch it. My ideas were rambling, inarticulate, and it's an hour and a half long. Never torture yourself with that thing. Maybe it'll disappear one day and just age off. But over the last few years, the thought's kind of grown, and other people have collaborated on it too. And it's just been a growing conversation. Like, how does disinformation work, and what are the parallels? So, introduction. I'm Mike Manrod. I work for Grand Canyon Education. The normal disclaimer: these are my ideas only. They in no way represent my employer. We've got some. I've got some good friends in the room that I get to collaborate with on some cool stuff. So, just basically by way of introduction at Grand Canyon, we just like to mess around, do cool stuff, have fun, and if it's ever worth sharing, we give a shot at either presenting it or writing up a white paper. So today we're going to take a look. We're going to kind of go down the disinformation rabbit hole systematically. First, we're going to take a look at machines, and then we're going to take a look at people, like a little bit of cognitive psychology background about why it is we're so susceptible to disinformation. And then we're going to look a little closer at machines to understand people. And then we're going to really look at, again, zeroing back at how they come together. We're going to look at how social platforms and the machines we live on, we rely on in our society, our way of life, actually impact, make our society so ripe for disinformation, how it works. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how to disrupt it. So, whoops, I think I hit the wrong button. Here we go. So look at machines. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty big review for everybody in the room. But obviously, you have hardware, you have software running at different levels, from applications down through lower level software, down to operating systems, and obviously this is what we all eat, sleep, and breathe, so we don't need to spend much time on that. But what is software really? If we think back along the history of computing, software is really just ideas, right? Like, it's ideas that we express in a language. The idea has been around for much longer than computing. If we look at sheet music and a piano, you have ideas, they're expressed in a universal language, and the language's job is to facilitate the machine, and in that case, a person sitting at a keyboard translating it, taking that language, that universal language, and actually producing results in the world with it. So, if we begin to look at software just as ideas, and ideas expressed in a rather specific language to carry out an objective, all of a sudden the similarities, between how disinformation occurs on machines and how disinformation occurs with people, the similarity begins to become apparent, right? I'm going to have to stop doing that. Those who brought Rotten Tomatoes, just beam them at my head every time I hit the wrong button. So look at people. Yeah, there you go. I'll bet that'll make a thundering noise when it hits me if you throw that. He's got to unmute. You'll have to like unmute it right before it hits, so there's this epic crashing. Yeah. If you have a question, and those on the stream, definitely interrupt us over Discord. Throw those in. I'll answer any questions as we go along. So if we look at people, if we look at human information processing, let's start with the pros and cons, right? Who thinks human information processing is pretty cool? Who likes it? I mean, I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, it takes a lot of caffeine to get it going in the morning, but once that happens, I'm pretty happy with it. But it's flexible, it's adaptable. We're really, really good as humans at pattern recognition. Anybody read any of the writings of Ray Kurzweil? He's written a lot of articles in the Blue Brain Project. He wrote How to Create a Mind. If you're curious about AI or neurophysiology, I definitely recommend the book How to Create a Mind. But in that book, Kurzweil talks about hierarchical hidden Markov models and how we've got patterns, patterns of neurons working in a predefined way, and they lock in those patterns, and that it makes us very, very flexible in how we can learn. Again, it makes the brain a very, very powerful computing tool. And we're adapted to recognize threats against our survival. Who's ever faced some sort of threat against your survival? Okay. Yeah, pretty much everybody here. Anybody who drove here or flew here had a moment, where you hit that air pocket and you're like, ah. Yeah, everybody who drove here or flew here probably had a threat against their survival within the past, days, right? We deal with this constantly. Now, who's ever been in a meeting where a project scope changes and you feel like it's a threat against your survival? Yeah. Daniel and I are laughing because we've been in a lot of those meetings together over the years, working together, right? Like our brain is not well adapted to recognize that a conference room is not like, the plains of Africa where there's a tiger or a cheetah after us. So yeah, that we react like that project scope change, or like, what? You mean I have to run all those scans at night? No, I don't want to do that. No, that's not going to work. So we react the same way as if we're being chased by a pack of hyenas, with an open wound, and we all deal with that within ourselves. We deal with that within our colleagues as well. So when we look at this, what does this really mean? It leads us to some cons. One, we're prone to error. We have systems that are set up to make quick adaptive decision making and very good decision making to keep us alive. Like if somebody faced a pack of angry wolves and maybe you've got a cut, you're camping, you're alone, you're cold, and maybe there's a couple ideas you could come up with quick that would save your life, who would want to stop, sit down under a tree, and analyze? That's the time to meditate and contemplate, right? No, not at all. Not at all, right? We have an amygdala hijack, a whole bunch of hormones are reduced and endorphins. We have cortisol, we have fight or flight. We're either prepared to protect ourselves as we huddle up and hope the bear doesn't do too much damage, or we're equipped to climb a tree or run or bash it with a rock or do something. Well, obviously we see that some of those reactions are maladaptive, at least some of the time. So that leads to where especially that system one thinking that's fast. Anybody read the works of Daniel Kahneman at all, like Thinking Fast and Slow? Phenomenal book. I highly recommend it. We'll get to Kahneman a little bit more in a few slides. But basically, we're very prone to biases, to heuristics, to mistakes in the ways we think. And we don't even realize it. And we'll get to some of the evolution of research along that. But we also evolve our thought process pretty slowly. Like, when's the last time the human brain has had a major hardware upgrade or wetware upgrade, if you will? Yeah, not too recent, right? Like, it's pretty much how it is. So if we have things that are wrong with it, obviously I have the same brain I had in 1993. Could you imagine if I had the same laptop running these slides that I had in 1993? I don't think it was actually a laptop, but yeah, I mean, it's a good thing we can upgrade our computing platforms, or this would be running on a 286 SX16 with, you know, with a meg of RAM or something like that, right? That I just let everybody know how old I am. But yeah, there's some cons to human information processing. So, anybody familiar with any of these gentlemen on the slides? Here we go. Look at that. See, I didn't dump the iced tea on the electrical outlet. Yeah. Oh, see, I put it on the ground. I'm safer. I'm safe now. Yeah, I think if I dumped that on my laptop, I would have an amygdala hijack, and it would exemplify that fight or flight. I'd like run out the door before the endpoint people could catch me. It'd be the shortest talk ever. So Leon Festinger, near the like not long after the turn of the last century, did some amazing research on what's called cognitive dissonance, and also began a lot of research on conformity. Anybody heard that term before? Okay, good. So we'll define it for everybody. So have you ever had a friend, anybody have a friend in high school or college who went down the wrong path? Like, they were great when you knew them when they were 15 or 18, but you look at them now and you're like, oh, I don't even recognize this person. How'd they get there? Anybody experience that? Yeah, I think we've all known that. So Festinger explained this really well with the idea of anybody, think about a time you've done something way outside of your values. Maybe in grade school, you're not the bully, but you have a bad day and you push another kid or something. Like, we can all come up with that example. Or you're normally really polite in meetings and you blow up at somebody. I mean, everybody can connect with one of those, right? Well, of course, you feel bad after, right? There's a couple answers to feeling bad after. Festinger would call that feeling bad after dissonance. So when you feel dissonance, you might revisit your life choices, change your behavior, and never do that again. That happens, he found, about a good amount of the time. But even more of the time, what we do is make up justifications, excuses, right? So we go through and we're like, yeah, I pushed him, but he pushed me the day before. And now what happens is you create an anchor that resets your behavior. And then if you act, again, consistent with that slightly adjusted value, there's more dissonance, there's a new anchor. And that's where you look at people, like, we deal with it in cybercrime a lot. Like, how could somebody do that? They just shut down a hospital. Well, Festinger would say it was probably a result of new anchoring points, dissonance, justifications, and then new anchoring points till next thing you know, like, oh yeah, a few people will die, but come on, it's 500 grand. Who cares? Right? So it's a journey where those anchoring points change. Solomon Asch defined what we loosely call peer pressure. Anybody relate to the time, think about a time you've maybe been sitting in a meeting, you see the correct answer, but everybody else sees it differently. Maybe you're new on a job, that hesitation you have to speak out. Well, the good news is, even in Solomon Asch, in his experiments, about 38% of the time people do speak out. But that actually means about 62, 63% of the time they don't speak out, right? So he showed that conformity, and what he did as a group of students in his classes, he put them in a circle and had all of them in on the joke except one, where they would look at two lines and say whether it was longer or whether it was shorter. And he would, about somewhere in the 60 to 63% range, I think the number 62-ish is coming to mind, but I might be misquoting that. Everybody can hit me up in Discord later if I am with the real number. But basically, a large majority of the time, when it would get time to that student who wasn't in on the joke, who'd look at which line was longer, they would knowingly give the wrong answer, because clearly 8 people in a row just looked at it like, man, my eyes must be really bad today. I can't contradict that whole table of other people. They can't all be wrong. I must be wrong. And then everybody has heard of Pavlov's dogs, right? We all experience, hey, it's lunchtime. I heard the bell. I'm salivating, right? Everybody's heard of Pavlov's dogs, right? So conditioning is also a thing. So, again, we can begin to think of how do our social platforms, how does our technology begin to condition us? But my two personal favorites, and you can begin to get into their work two ways, the serious way or the fun, casual, novelish way. Two brilliant cognitive psychologists, one of them has won the Nobel Prize, Daniel Kahneman. Amos Tversky would have won the Nobel Prize with him, but he unfortunately died first. Kahneman and Tversky in Israel were university professors who had a great relationship and bounced ideas off each other for many years, but they really blew this science of heuristics and biases within cognitive psychology wide open. And, as opposed to just showing like, hey, in really weird edge case conditions, humans can behave a little peculiar, they began to define very, very specific heuristics and decision-making patterns we exhibit to be able to navigate the world we're adapted and suited to without having major problems, right? So anybody in the room want to take a stab at defining what a heuristic is as it relates to cognitive psychology? I mean, we work with the concept in computing too. Anybody want to put themselves on the spot for fun? I'll loosely define a heuristic as a predefined set of decision-making criteria that can be rapidly applied without significant thought. So we see this in computing all the time, right? Like it's a shortcut that's built into our information processing as people. So, some examples they came up with, like the availability heuristic. So, anybody afraid of plane flight more so than cars? I think I was at one time. Afraid of heights, like you go near a height, that's me. Oddly, I used to be on a deep void rescue team in the Navy, but I'm terrified of heights. I was then too. But now, like my kids go near the glass at the shopping mall, I'm like, no, don't get too close. Let's pull you back here. You're within 3 feet of that glass and it's like 50 feet. So that's an irrational fear, right? And if we go back to everybody knows that flying is safer than driving, particularly commercial air flight, right? All the math is clear, but we're still more afraid of flying sometimes, some people, than driving, even those who know it's irrational. Well, it comes down to availability. In general, people are more afraid going through a bad neighborhood of being shot than they are of heart disease when they eat bacon for breakfast, like I did this morning, right? The bacon is a lot more likely to kill me than walking through a bad neighborhood if you do the math. But we don't do the math. The availability heuristic, for example, tells us that we see more of the information about people shot and people in plane crashes than people in mass droves dying of heart disease because they eat too much bacon and drink too much caffeine and sleep too little and have too much stress, right? So that's an example of the availability heuristic. There's substitution heuristics. We kind of touched on anchoring, but they defined it much better. And basically, if you want the basic intro to Kahneman and Tversky's work, you can read a fun, easy book called The Undoing Project that basically is a biographical, fun story that unpacks a lot of this. If you really want the deeper concepts, I recommend Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a phenomenal and complete work on the topic. But you can kind of begin to see how this is beginning to take shape, right? Our thinking is flawed. We have biases, and those biases are even more repeatable and predictable than the biases we have in computing. We've already seen, if there's a flaw in a software product, at least we know how to fix it. It's sometimes difficult. It's often easy, but there's a fix. It's much more difficult to fix our mind and the way we think if that's off. There we go, another successful drink without spilling it. Now I just have to hit the right clicker button and we're set. So one last factor, and then we'll move beyond some of the cognitive psychology overview that sets the foundation for this. Dunbars number. So I think we can probably all identify with the experience of if you have thousands of followers online, lots of connections, maybe you work for a company with thousands and thousands of people. Do you feel connected with all those people? Like it's difficult to feel connected. And then maybe if you've been a part of a small graduating class, a sports team, smaller groups, you feel very connected, right? Yeah. Even your boot camp division might be small enough to feel connected with the group, and you see photos online years later. Oh, that's so and so. That's what they're doing. But you get a big group, you can't connect with it. So Dunbar came up with the idea that it's about a tribe size, and the numbers, people have varying opinions on the exact number, but it seems to land around 150 is the acceptable tribe size, right? If you have a company of 130 people, it's going to be a pretty intimate culture, possibly. You go to 300 people, and aspects of this were touched on a great business book called Crossing the Chasm. You get to a much larger group, companies struggle because they're like, wait a minute, we used to just trust everybody. Now we have to have HR manuals? Well, yeah, everybody doesn't know everybody anymore. They're not intimate, they're not connected. You're above the tribe size number. So, I mean, we think about that. What's the tribe size of Facebook or Instagram? You know, can we possibly feel connected? And of course, this leads to other topics that are very, very, hot topics these days, such as cyberbullying. We see a lot of phenomenon, that come out of having tribe sizes much larger than Dunbar's number, right? And we can't keep track of thousands of people in our mind, and we don't feel empathy the same way, right? Like if you're in a company of 10 and somebody dies, it's like you're mourning it for months. If you're in a company of 80,000 and you hear there was a death in the European division, yes, you may feel bad. You may have even emailed with them once, but then your mind moves on. And yes, we feel bad about not feeling bad, but we're fundamentally wired to work this way. It's hard to overcome. So now we'll take now that we understand some of the flaws of people, all of us in this room, for the most part, are here because we've spent a whole lot of time and effort studying ways that information systems are compromised, right? And this will be oversimplified. A few of you in this room are giving talks on just this slide, and obviously you could make a lifetime study of single boxes on this slide, but that's not our purpose here. But essentially, exploitation exists because we have vulnerabilities on hosts. We have somebody who wants to exploit those vulnerabilities with intent, obviously. Malicious ideas exploit vulnerabilities, right? Like if we look at software and communication protocols as ideas designed to carry out our will on the machines and thus in the real world, it's ideas. And then the attacker will obviously escalate privileges on the host, expand reach, carry out their objectives, the typical kill chain, right? So, I mean, if we look at it, malware is really just a bad idea. It's a bad idea that is expressed in a way that our information systems can translate and process. So for the purpose of disinformation, it's valuable to think of malware as bad ideas because that also brings into realm all the things we do to deal with malware. Some of them may translate back and give us insights on how to deal with disinformation. Yeah. It's also useful to think of malware as bad ideas and combating malware too. Personally, I've gotten insights in some of our strategy from a whole lot of thought experiments that outcropped from this as well. But malware is just a bad idea in a particular format to exploit vulnerabilities, to give an attacker the ability to run their code or their ideas. They want their ideas to run on your host, not your ideas. And then they want a little more power on that host. They want to expand their reach both on that host and to other hosts. And I think you can see where the gossip train is going to come in here pretty quickly on the disinformation side. So we can begin to kind of overlay how this fits with disinformation. What vulnerabilities do we have? Name some vulnerabilities. Just somebody throw out some that we have as human beings. There's trust. Yeah, sometimes trust is a vulnerability. Yeah, especially if it's like unchecked and there's no data. Like, I'm just going to trust because Daniel said it and I like Daniel. Yep, trust. What else? Conditioning. Yeah, the fact that we can be conditioned is itself a vulnerability. Absolutely. What else? Lethargy. Yeah, absolutely. Lethargy is definitely a vulnerability. Are we getting any on the Discord? Okay. Any others? What's that? Yeah, mental anchor points. What else? Biases. Yeah. Well, and I love biases because often the exploitable vulnerabilities, that critical RCE flaw that we have as humans, are usually deeply rooted prejudice, hate, fear, right? Like those are really the things, right? If somebody already has a sliver of fear and you can introduce a bad idea or a component of mental malware that amplifies that fear, like, gosh, the effects can be explosive. And now this is for bonus points. It's too bad I don't have T-shirts to give away. Maybe I should do that one of these times. Who who could guess, like, what's the privilege escalation on a human host, on a human endpoint? What's that? Trust. Let's think about where's the point where it stops just being software and it begins to be hardware or biological. Go ahead. Fear, yeah. Fear triggering like an amygdala hijack, cortisol, cortisones. It basically, it's that point where you don't think anymore. We've all experienced that. Like somebody went and pushed down your little sibling on the playground. No, I'm not thinking. I've got some scars from getting attacked by a dog earlier this year. Like definitely amygdala hijack. I wasn't, let's sit down and contemplate this dog's intentions. No, it's you put it down and put an arm across its throat and protect yourself, right? Um, it's an amygdala hijack that escalates privileges on the host. And as soon as you're dealing in stress hormones and you're not dealing in mental thought, as soon as you're dealing in rapid heuristics, especially designed for protecting oneself, protecting the things that you care about. So if you have malware, if you have mental malware, if you have bad ideas that will invoke an almost immediate amygdala hijack, and that then introduces other ideas that don't have to be true, right? If you're extremely patriotic, that gives you one disposition. Being prior Navy, obviously, consider myself patriotic. If you're afraid of people who look different than you in other ways, that could be it. If you're afraid of big government, that could be it. If you're afraid of government falling apart, like you can use your imagination to the ends of anything you could think of. And just like hosts, you might have malware that will run on one host that won't run on my MacBook and vice versa. Go ahead. Yeah, social norms are phenomenal. I should have put that on the slide. Great insight. Yeah. Social norms are huge. So we can begin to think of, just like on our enterprise environments, not every remote code execution flaw applies to every host or every piece of software, but you can begin to profile, like, oh, well, I'm going to go after web farms that are running Apache, so I'm going to use this package of exploits. I'm going to go after Windows web farms running IIS and .NET. I'm going to use this package. I'm going to send malware, via macro viruses to end users, or I'm going to capture credentials and do MFA social engineering and get in that way, or I'm going to do OAuth phishing and get permissions into a cloud environment, right? Similarly, when putting together, a cognitive malware, a disinformation campaign, very, very similarly, you can begin to identify, well, I can't control that this idea will just get my ideas to execute on everybody, but it'll hit 5% here. Well, I can't, like, this will hit a different 5% over here, and they're kind of like the opposite demographic. You can begin to see how you can seed quite a bit of chaos, right? Um, Any additional thoughts or questions before we move on? Go ahead. It is, yes. Excellent point. Yeah, it's related to the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. It's basically that protective mechanism that makes it so we don't sit down and contemplate how to get away from a pack of angry wolves. It saves us there, but it really works against us if we're doom scrolling through social media, if we're sitting in a meeting and project scope changes, all these other scenarios. So, you know, traditionally the reach of bad ideas is limited, right? So I think everybody knows disinformation is not a new phenomenon. How long has it been with us? Like, let's just guess. Yeah, to the beginning of time, millennia, and probably like you probably literally couldn't find a time where this wasn't a relevant and highly important phenomenon. But what's the impact of a bad idea without social media, without connected platforms, where my ideas can't reach any further than the local pub? Like when I was a kid, if I would have, somebody had a bad idea, they go to the local pub, they say that bad idea, and somebody says, knock it off, Norm, you're an idiot. Oh, okay. And that's the end of that bad idea, possibly. Um, what's that? If only, right? I mean, there was a time, back to Dunbars number, if your tribe size is 150 and your tribes are relatively isolated, how long does it take a bad idea to spread throughout the world? How many bad ideas have an opportunity to become worldwide? Well, throughout history, many do. But the ratio of them, the speed at which they take hold, the speed at which they spread, and the number of things you could do to mitigate them, are very, very different. And there have been a lot of great talks about the meme factor. Super salient ideas that connect with a particular emotional response that spread like wildfire. And sometimes, often these ideas are harmless. They're even beneficial. If I didn't have all the jokes and memes and funny things that people send me every Monday morning, I'm not sure I would get through Mondays. I'd probably just go back to bed, curl up, and that would be the end of it. Daniel would be stuck doing everything that week. So, I mean, when we look at it, not all of the things that we get from social platforms are bad. Connectedness and our connected way of life is something I'm not sure I'd trade for anything, just personally. But it brings with a different level of responsibility, just as having a connected world brings a security burden for what we need to do to protect that connected world, and the importance of losing information systems back in my 286 SX 16 days when I had like 2 games on it. Now it's a little more important than then. And compromise, it can really impact our society, our way of life. It can be devastating. Well, it's similar with disinformation now. So social media can take bad ideas and literally make them wormable, right? Once I carefully craft a disinformation campaign, a bad idea, a bad message, and deliver it out into the world, I need a certain amount to get it going. Go ahead. Yeah, definitely. It's the amplification. And, in martial arts, any martial artists in the room besides me? Yeah, okay, cool. A few, yeah. So, you talk about things like force multipliers, right? There's single points where you have leverage to control a lot of force with a little force, or obviously edged weapons or things that amplify force over a small surface area. They're force multipliers. Well, our technology performs, it's a force multiplier. It performs amplification of our ideas. And who are the most likely people to know people with a particular vulnerability? Yeah, friends, family, relatives, all the people in their circle of influence. Like if we did a network map of human nodes, those next couple layers out would be the people. So that amplification point comes back to, if there's some sort of legitimate trigger event, which could even be induced, right? Or it could be made up. Often the trigger event is literally a fake story that resonates with a particular response. A carefully constructed narrative that's delivered with custom tailored supporting information, because it's just like maintaining compromise in an enterprise environment. You have to have command and control. I mean, you don't want to just hook a system because you want to carry out an objective. And it's almost never just one system, and the system you get first is almost never the system you want, right? So it's the same with disinformation, except there's more of a bot element because it really is effective when done through masses. And then what do you end up with as an output of it? You end up with polarization. You end up with, I feel like we prior to social media networking, disinformation campaigns, it seemed like we were a little closer across the world, right? Like there were the extremes that were recognized as extremes. General viewpoints sat a lot closer to a midline. And, as I talk to people and travel around and have, discussions, it seems like the distance from that midpoint is further, the standard deviation, if you will, is greater, and the concentration at the extremes are causing a very abnormal distribution of people along ideas, right? But that's a natural output you would expect from disinformation. Did you have another question from the Discord? Yeah, definitely, right? It's the reach of information, it's the quantity of information, and excuse me, I love what you brought up about the quantity of information because it's hard to validate. It's very easy and cheap to put information out, and it's very difficult to validate the integrity of information. I'm sure I'm not the only one working in our line of work who gets emails from people all the time, text messages from friends. Is this true? Can you validate this? Is this legit? Anybody else get tired of those? I've had to apologize to a couple of people because I've went off on them and I'm like, look, I apologize. You're like the 80th this week. And I'm not going to spend 100 hours researching this to disprove it. It's ridiculous. Like, let's just move on. So, but the amount of effort it takes to integrity check the amount of information we take in, it is such a high processing burden on us as individuals that people have often just given up on checking things. They just take for granted what they see. They'll maybe check a source once, but again, they'll check that source not based upon a rigorous scientific analysis of the truth of things it puts out. They'll check that source by how well the biased stuff it says lines up with the biases they already have. And I say they, I really mean we, right? We all do this. I do this too. It's just natural, innate human nature. So, how do we defend against this? We'll get a little deeper, and then we'll kind of take questions on that. In cyber, we all love kill chains, right? And in military too, kill chains are a lot of fun. So we're going to look at kind of like a disinformation kill chain. That's been like one of the thought experiments of this is like, what would it look like to set up a kill chain for disinformation, and how could we leverage that to better protect ourselves, our society, our way of life? Because, as we've seen, like the impact is not zero of this phenomenon. It's very, very high impact. So obviously, credit goes to Lockheed Martin for their cyber kill chain. Don't need to dwell on that. Everybody knows that pretty well here, probably. If not, if you're just starting off, definitely Google that. It's good. But then go to MITRE ATT&CK because, in my opinion, it's much more useful. But it's a good salient example of a simple kill chain we can reference. And then there's the old military one. Anybody recognize the find, fix, target, track, target, engage, assess? When I was researching this, I sort of had like a brief flashback to either boot camp or some slide I ignored 20 years ago or something like that, but it resonated. But the military put this together a lot longer before Lockheed did, and they kind of pioneered the idea of kill chain. Of course, they mean something a little different by kill. So, what would a disinformation kill chain look like? Well, if we were going to launch, if we here decided, all right, that's it. We're gonna turn evil today, all of us. We're gonna go out to one big happy hour. We're gonna pull up a whiteboard. We're gonna drink a bunch, and we're gonna figure out how to just wreck the world. So the thought experiment is, what steps would we follow? Well, first we'd have to define campaign objectives. We'd have to figure out, like, what do we want to accomplish? Do we want to sow division? Do we want to create such overwhelming support of one idea that it, overcomes another idea, causing some sort of disruption? Are we doing it from a nation state perspective? Are we a disgruntled, disheveled faction of society that feels unappreciated? Like, who are we? What do we want to do? You have to, like any attack, you have to define your objectives. Now, once you have your objectives, I think it bifurcates into a couple tracks. We've all seen it. If you want to do something that involves a botnet, you either need to rent, buy, or cultivate a botnet. So in this case, let's just assume that you need to cultivate it to pull it off. So you have a parallel track of, creating accounts, setting up chat bots, setting up all the infrastructure you need, the rough outer shell that will deliver your malicious communication. And remember, it's got to be multi-layer, multi-channel, and complex enough to really resonate with people over and over again in multiple ways to build and expand upon the viewpoint you want to cultivate, right? But in parallel, you're going to map and organize your target culture. This is like the disinformation campaign equivalent of your vulnerability scans, right? What hosts do they have? What OSINT can I find out? And actually, some of that's even the same OSINT. What ports are open? What services are running? Are you running the service called "I hate this kind of person" or "I dislike that kind of person"? Oh no, but you're running the service called "I'm terrified of XYZ. I'm terrified of heights." Well, we'll say that this group over here wants you to stand on top of tall things. Oh, terrified. Okay. What am I supposed to hate again? Like, obviously, I'm making fun of the process, but you can kind of get the idea. Then, once you have those fears and biases to target, once you know your target demographic, what you want to accomplish, and you have all those mapped out, it's creating and delivering the content, right? And a lot of folks in the room and probably on the stream do content creation. So we know what all this is about. And at that time, if you're running a disinformation platform, hopefully you've got all the accounts created, you've got everything set up, and your technical track has aligned with your human track, and you're just ready to cause chaos. And then, of course, you maintain and control your cognitive foothold. And then what do? You evaluate the effectiveness, calibrate ongoingly, like, whoa, I think some disinformation campaigns have probably done this. Like, whoa, that was way more effective than they thought. What do we do now? Yeah. I mean, again, it's sinister, but I'm sure people are literally having these conversations right now, right? So, what's valuable about kill chains? Anybody want to throw something out there? Like, what's valuable about the kill chain idea as it relates to information systems? Oh. Yeah, exactly. It offers a point to disrupt. What's that? Or control, right? To disrupt, to control, to alter. I have a friend who once described it as like a chain of pearls. As you have connected ideas or process steps, if you break it, all the pearls just go everywhere. So if we disrupt creating the infrastructure, then the campaign's probably not very effective. That's where we've seen lots of pressure on social media companies and counterintelligence and three-letter agencies and that kind of thing. Obviously, if people have a greater awareness of that disinformation is even a thing. Like, when I first started talking about this, 6, 7 years ago or whatever, people were like, "Dis what? Huh?" Yeah, like I got the weirdest responses from most people. Obviously, probably not from people in this room. I think it was probably some of the folks in this room are like, "Oh yeah, this is a real problem." But the world in general, if you just went to a random bar and started talking disinformation in 2015, 2016, you'd get this really weird look. So what can we do? What are the things we've learned from protecting information systems that we could apply to protecting our most important information processing unit to each of us individually and to collective groups, because there's nothing more frustrating, even in our social units, to have people go off the deep end and just go nuts because they're believing every crazy thing put out there. Anybody else have friends that you're like just trying to reel back in? Like, because the effects are real. Like when you go for a disinformation campaign that's negative and malicious, hook, line, and sinker, the effects I've seen in a lot of people that I've interviewed and talked to about this are true disillusionment, true deep, deep depression. Like if you create a false narrative that's a very, very dark picture of the world and somebody reaches the full point of believing that all the way, it's sort of like if somebody's running a crypto miner and just trying to eke out every bit of juice they can from your laptop. Like it's not a great experience for your laptop, forgetting about the broader, the broader implications. Like it sucks for the controlled node, right? Even if they don't know it sucks at the time, it sucks. So, what are the things we can learn from our line of work that might apply to this? Let's throw out some ideas. Everybody's like, we're at that point where we need more caffeine. I recognize that. I'm there too. So, obviously this could go a lot further and we could have a long, deep conversation just about what to do. But to fit it into a 2-minute slide and leave room for some Q&A, threat intelligence and information sharing has been really valuable to us in cyber, right? Like knowing what people are doing, what campaigns are emerging, what trends, kind of staying on the cutting edge and trying to think of how to protect ourselves against things. It's really valuable. So know who's attacking and guard against them. Again, anchoring back to that kill chain. Like you can analyze the different steps. Maybe as technology companies, we can guard against people on our platforms cultivating these campaigns, creating fake accounts, putting in the infrastructure they need to distribute, their mental malware. And you could go all along the kill chain and I'm sure come up with 100 disruptive measures I've never thought of. But you can begin to think of them. The other is set aside personal agendas and look at facts, right? Like no matter what we think, no matter what our bias is, we can get better at integrity checking. A lot of the software we put on our systems to protect against attack is software that looks like, hey, you could do things like file integrity monitoring. Like, whoa, that's not what the hash is supposed to be on that file. You can do things like behavioral monitoring. Whoa, that's not how my system's supposed to behave. Like one thing I've tried to do is I've been studying this, and I do an imperfect job at it, right? Like everybody else. But there are moments like when my blood pressure is up, when there's that pounding in the head, when I feel the cortisol rushing through my veins. A good question to do is just stop and ask, like, okay, what am I upset about? What did I just read? What did I just see? What truly is going on here? What made me react that way? Is this thing I read even true? Like, so we can disrupt the kill chain as individuals, and then again, if we put cognitive malware antivirus on humanity, it'll be a lot harder to exploit humans, right? So there's firewalling, right, which we talked about. Ideas coming in, maybe we filter out some of our sources, right? Like maybe I just don't read those cool tabloids with all the fun stories about Jerry Springer and aliens and what they're planning together, right? Like I could actually just disconnect myself or block out certain information sources that are likely to be not wonderful for me. We already covered if a new idea fills you with anger and hate, be very, very suspicious. Same deal. If you see something weird on the host, if you see something weird on yourself, guard against that. And then patching and vulnerability management, like if we deal with the underlying things, like if we're just a little less fearful of each other, if we clean up some of the vulnerabilities within ourselves, within our society, and have fewer points to where somebody can just introduce an idea and make us angry, hateful, whatever, cause that privilege escalation, it's going to go a long way. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, thoughts, ideas, both on the stream and in the room. Well, cool. I put it on the first slide. My Twitter's at Crude Solutions. Let's see, I'll go rapid back to put on the intro slide for that. So if you're interested in this, or if you contemplate it later, apologize for the fast rewind, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Mike Manrod, or Twitter, Crude Solutions, and yeah, just happy to engage in dialogue. My hope with this is that it gets legs and that people think of ideas for how to deal with this. Hopefully, 100 times better than any I've thought of. And just like mental malware spreads through networks of people, the solution also arises in the collaboration and ingenuity of networks of people, just like all of you here, all of us here. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the con.